There's no question that Tim has very strong values relating to protecting our environment, preserving our culture, and I think most of his adult life has reflected those values.
Deep down inside of him, he loves Hawaii. You can tell that by his outside activities, by some of these challenging employments he's taken on.
He's not afraid to take risks. He's not afraid to learn new things and to create a really positive environment for achieving goals. Tim has a really strong ability of bringing people together.
Tim is probably the most humble person that I have ever met, and I think his humility demonstrates his aloha for the land and the people of Hawaii.
For over 30 years, Tim Johns has been a leader in preserving and perpetuating Hawaii's natural, cultural, and historic resources. The historic Hawaii Foundation is proud to honor Tim as its 2013 Āina of the Year.
All I know is that Tim's a good guy. A real good guy, in many respects. My dad was in the Navy. We traveled all over. We lived all over the U.S., East Coast, West Coast, Europe, and originally I came to visit some friends that were living here on the North Shore to surf with them. When I first came, it was sort of like, this is it. This my soul has come home. I've been all over the world, but this is really the place that I think I really belonged. On its face, a lot of time Hawaiian language or Hawaiian music and Hawaiian dance and other kinds of expressions of Hawaiian culture had been pushed down to the side for so many years, but they couldn't stop the true Hawaiian spirit, and that was something that I felt pretty strongly.
For Tim, I think coming into this community and seeing what it represents has gone into his heart and made it truly part of not just his personal life, but his professional life as well.
Tim has been very instrumental in some of the biggest conservation and preservation projects here in Hawaii, especially with the Nature Conservancy. But we started off as a very small organization. We needed people like Tim to come in and start to do the job that we thought we could, and it really caught on. In those days, the Nature Conservancy was really focused on the scientific and driven by scientific reasoning as to why areas were picked and why they were used, but you can't help, as you learn about the history of these sites and these places, and you understand how they were used in the past and how Hawaiians, Native Hawaiians and others interacted with them, you can't help but start to see that there really is a connection, and that if you really want to preserve these areas and why they're important, you have to also think about the cultural resources side.
It's that connection, I think, with the ocean particularly that makes him appreciate and love and want to protect our natural resources. And as the culture of these islands is so intertwined with the natural environment, it's something that I think is very personal and passionate to him.
One of the areas that demonstrates a connection between natural resources and cultural resources, and ultimately historic and maritime resources, is the northwestern Hawaiian Islands.
The idea that these were an isolated group of islands is something that's contemporary. In past times, there were regular voyages to these islands. The message is that Hawaiians not only used to do things, Hawaiians continue to do things today. And Tim always advocated for traditional and customary practices to be allowed in the monument. Tim served a very important role.
Tonight is an important marking of a decade of passion, a decade of commitment, and a decade of working together to ensure protection of one of the last great places on Earth.
Culturally, those islands were very important to how Hawaiians viewed themselves in the universe and in the world. And that is why ultimately it was listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site on both natural resources and cultural resources.
Tim has been the chair of the Trust for Public Lands Board in Hawaii for over 15 years. Thanks to Tim's leadership, the Trust for Public Land has been able to preserve many cultural and historic sites throughout the state of Hawaii. The valley was endangered in a number of ways. The H3 at one time was proposed to go through the valley, and then at one point there was some discussion about perhaps developing a residential subdivision in the valley. Tim was one of the key people within the estate of Samuel Mills Damon that were extremely supportive of selling Moanalua Valley for conservation, so that not only the forest would be preserved, but also the many important historic sites within the valley.
What makes Hawaii special is not just looking at the mountains and seeing native forests there, but it's also how do people interact with those forests and how do we interact with one another. The lessons that you learn by going into a native forest and how you connect with that, those are cultural resources too, because people that lived here long before us, those were cathedrals for them. I mean, those were churches.
When he came on in late 2007, it just happened to coincide, unfortunately, with what we all experienced in 2008, and that was essentially the Great Recession. And so he stepped in during this time and really took a leadership role in not only navigating all of the challenges that come from dealing with a downturned economy on your operations, but also still inspiring people around the community to support Bishop Museum. And we were able to open Hawaiian Hall after its first major renovation in its history in 2009.
One of the terms that we tried to use more was the idea of restoration. And what do you restore? You restore faith, you restore trust, you restore health, you restore a nation. All of those messages, I think, come through really loud and clear in Hawaiian Hall, and that's why it was such a departure and such a joy to open it up and share the end result with the community.
I think what Tim's work and legacy represents is transcending not just the creation or renovation of a gallery space, but the true establishment of a gathering place for this community to enjoy and celebrate and be inspired by the great works of Native Hawaiians.
You look around at the museum now, it's just a wonderful, even better place to be. And it's the hard work reinvigorated by Tim Johns.
He could have just stayed with one company and risen there. He could have stayed in the public sector. He could have stayed in the nonprofit sector. But no, he has challenged himself, and that's what we need. That's the kind of attitude we should have, that we can meet our challenges by taking risks and pushing ourselves and working with others. The spirit of aloha and ohana, these are not just words to us. This is how we want to be. These are aspirational goals for us.
You know, that we have to think about that in Hawaii a lot more. We have to think about how we are special and how we can change the rest of the world. We should not fear influence from the rest of the world. We should make sure that we preserve what is the core of what makes Hawaii, Hawaii, and then we know that if other people in the world touch that, we're going to change the rest of the world.
I assume that he and his wife will continue to be, you know, in Hawaii. And lucky for us. Lucky for us.